The Business of Biotech is produced by Life Science Connect and its community of learning, solving, and sourcing resources for biopharma decision makers. If you're working on biologics process development and manufacturing challenges, you need to swing by bioprocessonline.com. If you're trying to stay ahead of the cell or gene therapy curve, visit cellandgene.com. When it's time to map out your clinical course, let clinicalleader.com help. And if optimizing outsourcing decisions is what you're after, check out outsourcepharma.com. We're Life Science Connect, and we're here to help. Dr. Brian Fiske wasted no time moving from academia to industry. In fact, his academic and industrial pursuits show quite a bit of overlap. His PhD work on cancer metabolism made immediate impact on the clinical development and ultimate commercialization of at least 2 drugs. And judging by the entrepreneurial decisions he's made since then, he seems intent to double down on those wins with a current focus on antibody drug conjugates. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and I'm delighted to bring you Brian Fiske, who now serves as Chief Scientific Officer at Mythic Therapeutics, the company he co-founded in 2016 and one that's currently embarking on a phase 1 study of its lead ADC in non-small cell lung cancer. Dr. Fiske, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you. It's great to see you again. Dr. Fiske and I first met at JPM back in January and made plans to get back together and record an episode on what's going on at Mythic. So here we go. And before we jump into the Mythic story, Dr. Fiske, I want to get some background on that mention that I made about sort of your overlapping academic and industrial pursuits. It's unique, I think. I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of founders and CEOs of small biotechs, and often there's a much more clear line of demarcation between academia and industry. You earned your PhD in biology from MIT in 2015 on the heels of a Harvard undergrad in biochem. But during and prior to that PhD, you're going to clear this up for me. During and prior to that PhD, you gained experience at Bain, Mass Gen, Flagship Pioneering, and Agios. Am I pronouncing that correct? Agios Pharmaceuticals?
Agios
Pharmaceuticals. So tell us about that. Tell us about like what looks to me like this pretty unique combination and overlap of academia and industry.
Absolutely. Well, you started with undergrad, so maybe we'll go there first.
Yeah.
In undergrad, I studied biochemistry, but also did some work in applied math and economics. And I think if you had asked me back then what I wanted to do with my life, it would have varied week to week. And I would have either said, I want to go be a scientist, be a doctor, or do something in business. And I had the opportunity to do an internship after my junior year, ended up at Bain. I ended up going to Bain after undergrad. And I think I chose that direction, at least initially, to go into business, general management consulting, because I wasn't ready to make a decision on those 3 things. And it seemed like the least committal path.
Yeah.
Realized pretty quickly that I wanted to go back. I wanted to go back to school and get my PhD in science and take that route. And as a step on my way there, I spent a year as a lab tech in my former advisor's lab, Dr. David Fisher, who's the head of dermatology at MGH. He's been a fantastic advisor and mentor to me over the years. And left Bain, left my 6-figure job there, and took a giant salary cut to go schlep tissue samples around MGH and make cell lines. And it was fantastic preparation to get my my lab feet under me for a year before going to grad school.
Yeah.
While I was in grad school, I decided to join Matt Vanderheiden's lab. Matt, at the time, it was his first year as a professor, and I was his first student. So maybe that speaks to some entrepreneurial vision. Starting a new lab in academia is not dissimilar to a startup.
Yeah.
And
were you conscious of that when you made that decision and found yourself in that situation? Were you conscious of sort of the entrepreneurial parallel, or was it just like, hey, this is a cool opportunity, and that acknowledgement came later?
I think so. I think so. I think you have, um, there's an aspect when you go into a new lab, there's an aspect of focus, but also an aspect of flexibility. I mean, in your PhD, you're driving a lot of the work, but I think in a new lab, you have a lot more flexibility and a lot more impact on what the rest of the lab is doing,
Mhm.
because you are the lab to start.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there are a lot of parallels, and I was probably attracted for the same reason that I'm ending up, being a founder at Mythic.
Yep. Yeah. All right. So that lab experience, I think, even along with sort of that entrepreneurial exposure of building out a lab that didn't previously exist, the result of the work you did in that lab also, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm reading this correctly, um, the work that resulted from that lab work also contributed to, it seems to me, right, the acquisition of the taste for drug development and industry. Is that would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. To be clear, I ended up consulting for Agios. And so Matt was on Agios's SAB, and
Mm,
also contributed to some of the programs there. And I had colleagues who were working on projects that were directly related to Agios. I wasn't working on anything like that, but I had a lot of skills in doing so-called hot experiments, radioactive experiments, and doing mass spectrometry based metabolomics, where I got into some collaborations with Agios and essentially ended up consulting with them for 2 periods. And that was super exciting. That was my first taste of, real entrepreneurship, where when I did my first stint with them, they were 30 people, mostly chemists, working on trying to find a lead drug. And then when I came back a year later, they were 130 scientists. They were in phase 1. They were seeing some fantastic results for really sick patients. And it was so amazing to see, what had been done in only a year, and just got really inspired to do something, get involved with something that looked like that.
yeah. Yeah. When did I don't want to jump ahead if I got the chronology wrong, but when did Flagship come into the picture?
Sure. So, uh, based on my experience at Agios, and again, thinking, gosh, I really want to do something that looks like that, get involved in some way with something that looks like an Agios and ends up having an impact on patients and building a really exciting company. Uh, I started to reach out to my network because it wasn't clear at that time that academia was going to be the right thing for me, the right next step for me.
Hmm.
So, what would it look like to work in biotech? And the advice that I got was, hey, as a junior person, um, your career is going to be inflected by how well the company does, right? So if you show up at a small biotech and this small biotech does super well, you're going to have a ton of opportunities to grow. If you show up at a small biotech and it fails, that's okay, because you're a junior person and no one's going to blame you for the failure of the biotech, but you're going to have to go somewhere else to get those sort of growth opportunities. And so that immediately brought the question to my mind of, okay, how do I find and start, figure out what a great biotech looks like? And people would give me the answers, well, you should go talk to the CEO, or you should, think about the science and whether, you think it's going to translate into the clinic. And my answer was, gosh, I don't know how to do any of those things.
Mm, yeah.
So I got really interested in the question, though, of what makes a really great biotech. And that led me to Flagship, because I felt like Flagship was a place where they were creating multiple biotechs in the same place at the same time, and that I would get some experience to try to figure out, what works well and what doesn't work well when you go out and start a biotech.
Hmm. Yeah. Definitely a good sort of petri dish to play with those concepts at Flagship. A lot of opportunity for that. You've mentioned though a couple of times so far in this discussion. You've mentioned a couple of points where it sounds like you personally sort of had to pause and think about what you were doing, what you wanted to do next. Like you talked about at Bain, I'm not sure, just whether or not this is where I want to stay, or it took you a while to determine I want to go back to academia. And then you just mentioned, at Agios, like, or Agios, that is, what's my next step going to be? In those moments, the question I have for you is like, in those moments of what's next in your mind, Was there ever any sort of anxiety or pressure, or was it a little bit more relaxed? Like, hey, I've got options. Let me think hard about which options I want.
Yeah. Uh, to be honest, huge anxiety
Okay,
and
yeah,
huge
yeah,
pressure, right?
yeah.
Uh, I, I, I love my parents and they've been a fantastic influence in my life, but my parents thought I was crazy for quitting Bain and going to work as a lab tech.
Sure, yeah,
I mean, I was, qualifying for, like poverty related tax credits that year. You know?
but you had, I mean, you had some assurance in your mind anyway that this is part of it's a step toward a greater plan, right? Like,
Exactly. Exactly. So I think I've always thought I tend to think a lot about, what is the right environment for me to make the biggest contribution that I can to something that inspires me, right? Whether that's building, and to me, what inspires me, building a company and building a company that is able to have a really big impact on patients who are sick.
yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. I was there. I have a son who's a freshman in college right now, and I'm just sitting here like empathizing with your parents. Like, we sent you to MIT for that degree so that you could do what? Yes, that's crazy. So Flagship, I want to get back to Flagship. Like I said, like I'm a big fan of Flagship. I've interviewed a ton of their CEOs and founders. And it's interesting, like most of this may be just anecdotal observation. I'm not sure if there's anything to talk about here or not, but most of the founders and or hired guns that I've interviewed that are with Flagship companies now are execs who came from big bio, and the stop at Flagship has been sort of part of their move into emerging. I haven't I haven't had occasion to talk with execs that did time at Flagship like early in their career, right? Like coming out of the experiences you came out of. Was that unique, like to you, to Flagship? Was that sort of a unique scenario?
Great question. So one thing I would note is that Flagship has changed over time.
Mhm.
I can't speak for Flagship
Sure.
anymore.
Yeah.
I was
No.
there.
Yeah. We're just speculating right now.
There you go. I think Flagship's undergone a ton of growth, and they were growing a lot. And when I was there as well. But no, my role was not unique. I was
Mhm.
a associate and then a senior associate, and they had lots of other associates at the time. I think maybe around 10. Um, but I checked a few years later, and they might have had 30 or 40. So they
Yeah.
have a lot of folks who are right out of some sort of grad school, usually PhD, who are working now with many of those execs who have been in biopharma and they're transitioning back to, company creation, who work together to get the companies off the ground.
Hmm. Why did you leave Flagship?
Yeah, so uh, I left Flagship with nothing other than the idea that I wanted to start a biotech independently. So part of it was, I'd had two experiences at Flagship, co-founding or working on founding companies, creating companies, and I wanted to seize the challenge to see if I could do that independently.
Mhm.
Um, and in my vision for what that looked like, I learned things at Flagship that were, indispensable for founding Mythic, right? Absolutely critical. And that was, so Flagship was an incredible experience for me in that sense. Um, but my vision for what I wanted to build was a little bit different than a Flagship company. I think, at least for speaking about the time that I was there, a lot of Flagship companies tend to focus on building a technology first and then
Mhm.
thinking about what are the therapeutic applications of that technology. And obviously that's worked out really well sometimes, right? Like Moderna. Thank you, Moderna, for the COVID vaccines.
Yeah.
Um, but Moderna was originally, I think, spent a lot of time building a technology, and that enabled them to go and do that. I think what I was most excited about was building a therapeutics focused company from the start, and that being the primary goal. And yes, at it's embodied at Mythic, right? And so at Mythic, yes, we want to use novel technology to make that drug that's going to benefit patients. We know we need to. We want to be doing something different than other companies. But the focus at the end of the day is how do we make the best drug we possibly can for those patients?
Mhm. Yeah. Where did you feel most equipped? And then I'm going to ask, I might as well just throw both parts of the question out now. Where did you feel like most equipped, and where did you feel the least equipped in terms of your body of knowledge, the body of knowledge that would be required to found Mythic?
I would say, one of the changes right off the bat, and it's a very obvious one, you got to be able to bring people on board who are not in the flagship ecosystem. When you're at flagship doing company creation, you're bringing in flagship resources. You're bringing in people who are in the flagship network. You're bringing in money from the flagship funds, and you're working with the partners to pitch them and do that. And all of that that whole ecosystem obviously has a focus and a certain set of goals, a certain set of things that they're optimizing for. And it's been very successful, but it's very different from the wider universe, right? It's got its own place in the wider universe. And so I think learning more about how do investors other than flagship think about investing in a therapeutics company over different rounds, because you want to make sure you have a company that's investable at every single stage. Thinking about, why would somebody join not a flagship company, but a company that's just, two guys and an idea? And how do you bring that team together and build culture? And so I think maybe I'll end there. I think the most challenging thing over time has been how do you bring together a team and how do you build a culture that allows you to be successful in the way that you want to be successful. And it's not only building that in the first instance, but also nurturing it and not taking any of that for granted. I feel incredibly honored to work with my colleagues. I'm incredibly honored that they came to work at a company that I co-founded. And that's probably been the best part of this whole experience.